I begin to realize now that what I do, and I see it in other things, is create things that people love, and that's what I like to do. It's been 36 years since I left the Villa del Sol and my offices, and I turned over my business into my employees and decided to go a different direction. And that direction could have been quite different had I known that during the years I was in the Villa del Sol as my offices, I had built what could have and should have been the way of the future in terms of construction. And the way I did that was it was all experimental to begin with, and some of it was pretty interesting. I think the main thing that I found that inspired me was something that an architect professor from UCLA had shown me, and his wife was part of the every Christmas we'd bring in a bunch of artists and artisans that occupied the third floor, which was yet to be finished. So they came in and just kind of operated that. And one of the women told me that her husband invited me to her home, which is in Hollywood Hills. And that's where I met her husband. And her husband, when he found out what I did, he decided to show me something that he had just finished experimenting with. And I saw it and I said, wow, that's incredible. I loved it. He had just taken 2 pieces of rib lath, which is very weak and very flexible, and tied them together and then poured concrete in the middle. Well, that may not seem like a lot, but boy, I saw it in a heartbeat. That's pretty incredible. You can do that. And subliminally, that never left my mind. You could build this way. You could make forms this way. It didn't go from his backyard to what we're going to see now, but there was a path there. Basically, that path was my understanding of what it took to build components in a factory, bring them to the field, and pour them with concrete. I had never worked with concrete before, and when I started to, I just, oh my God, this stuff is great. I mean, it's so strong, and you can control how much you put where you want to put it, and it'll tie everything together monolithically. It's fireproof. Do it right, it's soundproof. So at any rate, as luck would have it, one of my clients, Eric Wittenberg, had grown up in a family where their business was concrete and concrete forming. In fact, they were some of the original concrete contractors in Los Angeles and built one of the major hotels. So Eric grew up in that environment. So when I told him of my ideas, he says, yeah, well, we used to do something like that. So that was kind of like, okay, but here's what I wanted. And I showed him, basically, I'd already built one apartment project, and I had designed some other things that I wanted to build, and he grabbed onto it and said, yeah, okay, let's do it. He had a piece of property in Riverside where he could build an apartment house. I said, fine. And coincidentally, this was 1969, and George Romney came in to become head of Housing and Urban Development, HUD. And George decided, coming out of Detroit, coming out of the automobile industry, that housing was done wrong, that it needed to be manufactured like everything else. And he may not have had the vision of how to do that, but he knew that this is what it needed in order to maintain a level of potential for people to own homes. So he started a program called Operation Breakthrough. And his vision was simply that. It needed to be a breakthrough. I never bought into it exactly, but it sure inspired me. And I decided, well, I'm going to get involved with this. Not directly. I never saw George or any of his people. It didn't matter to me about the contest. It's just like the idea. At that point, with Eric, we kind of combined the different thoughts. And there was a company in Fullerton that was producing steel panel. If not inspired by, was developed while I was part of this building. And it was part of me. And basically, it influenced a lot of things, including a lot of people, where they could come and we could go have lunch in one of the various restaurants. And you got out into the courtyard, you could sit and talk, you can do a lot of different things. And in this environment, I believe a lot in environment. In this environment, and working with Ron Livingston and Eric Wittenberg, we came up with these ideas. I mean, mostly it was mine regarding the method of building. But the thing that came out of this is so important. Actually, 2 things, or maybe 3. One would be that you cannot build things in the factory. bring them to the field and try to connect them with nuts and bolts. It can be done, but it's not very good. In fact, it's terrible. So what I did was built panels in the factory that you brought to the field, brought to the job, and you filled them with concrete. Now, concrete's a different animal. It flows everywhere. You know, the concrete we use, we call pea gravel. 6-inch slump, and it goes everywhere. And once it hardens, you have a monolithic structure. Because what you have done before you poured the concrete is you put steel in key places that held things together. There were no bolts. The steel was put in, and you poured the concrete. That was it. That's the structure. That's the structure in almost every reinforced steel building. And I saw this very clearly, that to try to do anything, even the last Motel 6, which would be the second one, I did everything. Everything was manufactured. The windows came to the job finished. The front entrances were totally complete. The doors were in them, and everything was done. The walls were panels, but they basically were finished. There wasn't much left to be done on the job, and this is what I did. Understood. In fact, the bathrooms. Here's a bathroom being lowered into this Motel 6 is completely finished. You see it's wrapped in black plastic, but inside the tub and all the plumbing, it's done. The walls got poured with concrete, and the floor ceiling, everything got poured with concrete, became part of the structure. That was my vision. And it's one that I don't know if it's being shared or has been shared by anybody else. I see it more now than ever before. I see it as being, it was then the wave of the future, but nobody got it. Nobody understood it, and I didn't really understand it myself, or it didn't matter to me. It really did not matter. I developed it. I invented it. That's all I cared about. It worked. That's all I cared about. Once I finished the second Motel 6, I saw everything work. It was great. I was ready to move on. And that's what I did. Now, the rest of this story is based upon extensive testing and with renowned engineers and testing laboratories that were all qualified and validated by the International Conference of Building Officials. So what derived out of this was that in order to build things in a factory, bring them to the site, and make them into a building, everything needed to be complete as possible, because anything you didn't do in the factory, you had to do in the field, and that really, depending on how far you went, that kills everything. I mean, you had to have electricians and plumbers come in, but that's about it, and the drywall guys and the painters, but that was about it. All the other things that would be normal to a construction were eliminated. So here we are 40 years later, and not only was none of this seen by others or by enough or by the right people to be the way that things are being done today, but probably the most important thing is that the way that I built, which is to reduce things down to the least common denominator, reduce the amount of concrete, reduce the amount of steel, everything, proved to be a total operation breakthrough, and I didn't know it. The testing that I did showed a structure that was beyond belief, to the point that when I've tried to show it to engineers today, in the last year or two, they didn't believe it. I don't know why they didn't believe it, but I know that they thought it would be impossible to do. I don't disagree, but then I couldn't argue with that, because after all, they're the engineers, I'm not. But now I know that I was more of an engineer than I ever gave myself credit for, because obviously the things that I created were the wave of the future, and here's why.